Lily stood at the entrance of the grand ballroom, her eyes taking in the sparkling chandeliers overhead, the high ceilings that seemed to stretch into infinity, and the elegant sea of people who moved with the grace of royalty. The warm air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the soft hum of classical music that only added to the sense of intimidation. Her hands, fidgeting with the strap of her dress, felt foreign in this world, a world that didn't belong to her. She had grown up on a farm in rural Texas, where the closest thing to luxury was the worn leather boots she wore every day. Her life had always been simple, hands buried deep in the soil, the steady rhythm of milking cows and feeding chickens, and evenings spent under the wide, star-filled sky. There were no grand parties, no gold-encrusted furniture, no crystal, glasses clinking together in toasts. And yet, here she was. Rachel, her longtime friend, had insisted she attend. "You'll love it. Just imagine the connections you could make," she had said, her words full of excitement and promise. But standing here now, feeling the weight of her mismatched dress and her rough, calloused hands, Lily wasn't sure she belonged. She tugged at the hem of her gown, hoping it would somehow make her feel more at ease. But it didn't. The fabric, though beautiful, felt stiff against her skin, too delicate for the hands that had spent years working the fields. Her nails, chipped and worn, seemed painfully out of place next to the polished nails of the women around her, their fingers adorned with diamonds and gold. "Lily, over here, come join us." The people in the group turned to look at her. Their eyes swept over her, and Lily could feel the difference between her and them, a difference that went beyond appearance. It was as though she wasn't just dressed differently, she wasn't living the same life they were. They talked effortlessly about vacations in Paris, investments, the latest tech gadgets, while Lily stood there, trying to find a place to fit. In a place she wasn't sure existed. "Lily, meet some of my friends." Rachel's voice was cheerful, but it only made Lily feel more out of place. One of the women, tall and impeccably groomed, offered her a polite smile, while the man beside her, his suit worth more than Lily's entire wardrobe, gave her a nod of acknowledgement. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. Lily's throat tightened. She was a fish out of water, and the pressure to fit in, to become something she wasn't, weighed heavily on her chest. She should have just stayed home. She could have spent another evening in the fields, where everything was simple, where she knew the rules. She was about to make an excuse and slip away when her gaze was drawn across the room to the far corner, where the light dimmed. There, standing like a figure carved from shadows, was a man. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't engaged in the loud chatter, the exuberant laughter. He was just standing there, watching the room with an intensity that was almost palpable. There was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet authority that seemed to separate him from the superficial world around them. His eyes, dark, deep, met hers from across the room, and in that instant, something shifted. Lily's heart stuttered in her chest. She hadn't expected to find anyone in this sea of unfamiliar faces. Yet here he was, looking at her with an almost unreadable expression. She swallowed, her breath catching in her throat. She tried to look away, to ignore the pull she felt toward him. But she couldn't. His gaze anchored her in place. Her hands went cold, and the smile that had been frozen on her lips felt strained. Without thinking, she took a step forward, and then another. It was like something invisible was drawing her in, urging her to cross the room to him, to break free from the uncomfortable cage of this party. "Amara, you okay?" Rachel's voice was a distant echo, as if coming from underwater. Lily didn't answer. She didn't even hear her. Step after hesitant step, she found herself moving toward him, her feet almost gliding on the smooth marble floor, her breath shallow in her chest. As she neared, he didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched her, his eyes steady, focused, as though waiting for her to come to him. she stopped just a few feet away from him. He hadn't moved an inch, but now he was close enough that she could feel the weight of his presence like a tangible force. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The air between them was thick with something unspoken, a tension that made her pulse quicken. "Lily," he said, his voice low, the sound of it sending a shiver down her spine. His tone was calm, almost knowing, as if he had anticipated her approach all along. She found her voice, though it came out shakier than she had intended. You're the only one not talking." He looked at her for a moment, then shrugged slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. Lily's stomach flipped. It wasn't just his words, it was the way he spoke them, with that quiet certainty, the way his gaze held hers with unflinching intensity. There was something in his presence that made her feel both exposed and understood. The world around them seemed to slip away as she stood there, the sounds of the party blending into the background. This wasn't how she imagined her evening would go. She had thought she'd stand on the edges, unnoticed, just another face in the crowd. But here she was, standing in front of a man who didn't look at her with pity or judgment, but with something deeper, something more enigmatic. "I'm Lily," she finally said, her voice coming out quieter than she intended. She wasn't sure what she expected from this moment. Maybe some awkward small talk, maybe an apology for standing in the corner. But not this. The man nodded slightly, his lips curling into a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ethan," he said simply, and that was it. No more introductions, no more small talk. Just Ethan, standing there like he belonged exactly where he was, in a way Lily could only dream of. But something about him, something in the way his gaze held hers, told her this was only the beginning. As she stood there, caught in the pull of his presence, Rachel's voice called her name once more, but Lily couldn't tear her gaze away. Ethan's smile lingered in her mind, and she knew that this night, this moment, had changed everything. What was it about this man that kept her heart racing? Why couldn't she look away? And what would happen next? Lily sat perched at the edge of the pool bar, her fingers wrapped around a glass of champagne, trying to look like she belonged in a world she barely recognized. The pool stretched out before her like a glistening blue expanse, surrounded by soft lighting and white marble, all glittering under the stars. She'd taken a seat far from the crowds, not wanting to draw attention to herself, but it seemed no matter where she sat, she was still out of place. Rachel, ever the life of the party, was at the center of a group, laughing and chatting animatedly with the other guests. It wasn't long before one of the women, wearing a sparkly dress that seemed to cost more than Lily's rent, looked over and waved her in. "Lily, come join us. The water's amazing. You've got to try it." Lily hesitated. She'd always been a bit of a wallflower, preferring the quiet comfort of home to the chaotic hum of glamorous parties. But the alcohol had already started to loosen her grip on her usual anxieties, and the warm night air was inviting. As she stood to make her way over, one of the men from the group, an older, sharply dressed figure with a smirk that didn't seem to ever leave his face, caught her eye. "You're a little late to the fun, huh?" he said, his voice a mix of mockery and challenge. Lily forced a smile, but inside her stomach churned. "Yeah, just getting settled in," she replied, trying to keep her tone casual. She wasn't sure what kind of fun they were referring to, but she wasn't ready for whatever game they were playing. Rachel, seeing her discomfort, walked up and slung an arm around Lily's shoulders. "Don't mind David. He's just messing with you. But listen, we've got a little game going. You're so in. Trust me." A few heads turned toward Lily, and she felt a strange surge of unease wash over her. "A game?" she asked, her voice cautious. "Yeah." Rachel grinned, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of it all. "We dare each other to do silly stuff. You know, like jumping in the pool in your clothes or kissing the bartender. Nothing serious, Lily raised an eyebrow. That sounds harmless, she muttered, though she wasn't sure if she was being sarcastic or not. David leaned in, clearly enjoying the way Lily was squirming. "Oh, I've got a dare for you then," he said with a sly smile. "I dare you to swim in the pool. Naked." There was a sharp intake of breath from the group, followed by nervous laughter. Lily froze. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Naked? The thought of stripping in front of a crowd made her heart race with a mixture of panic and embarrassment. Rachel, sensing her hesitation, nudged her playfully. "It's just a dare, Lil. You'd be a legend. Come on, everyone's done it here." Lily felt her palms growing clammy as she grasped her glass tighter, the cold of the champagne mixing with the warmth spreading through her body. Her mind raced with conflicting thoughts. She had spent her whole life in the fields, unself-conscious, and comfortable in her own skin. But the thought of exposing herself, here in front of all these strangers, made her feel exposed, vulnerable. The group was watching her, their eyes gleaming with mischief and anticipation. The pressure built, and before she could think better of it, she found herself standing at the edge of the pool, looking down at the shimmering water below. The cold was already seeping into her thoughts, freezing her hesitation. "You'll do it, won't you, Lily?" Rachel asked, her voice sweet and encouraging, but with an edge that suggested this was a challenge. "It'll be fun, and besides, it's just us." Lily felt a lump form in her throat. Just us. The words felt like a lie. How could she ignore the stares, the judgment, and yet, a part of her, the part that had been yearning to break free from her usual self-imposed limits, wanted to say yes. She'd always been the quiet one, the one who never stood out. But here, now, there was a chance to finally be something else, to step out of the shell she'd built around herself. Her breath hitched. She could feel the eyes of the group boring into her, willing her to accept, to be one of them. It wasn't just the alcohol. It wasn't just the desire to fit in. It was something deeper, a longing to shed the layers of her old life, to do something reckless and bold for once. And yet, another part of her, the sensible, reserved part, wanted to retreat, to grab her coat and leave the party, never to look back. But this time, the desire to fit in, to be part of this glamorous world, tugged at her like a chain. I'll do it," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, but loud enough for the others to hear. Her heart raced as she looked at Rachel and the others, waiting for their approval. David's smirk widened. "That's the spirit! Come, on then. We're all watching." Lily took a deep breath, trying to steady her shaking hands as she walked toward the edge of the pool. The cold water glistened invitingly, and for a moment, she wondered if it would wash away the uncertainty swirling inside her. But just as she was about to slip off her dress, her gaze caught something, a movement in the shadows near the far side of the pool. There, leaning against a column, stood Ethan, the man who had caught her attention earlier that night. His eyes were fixed on her. He didn't smile, didn't speak. His expression was unreadable, but there was something about the way he watched her that made her feel exposed, but also oddly seen. His presence shifted something within her, amplifying the tension that already simmered beneath her skin. The others were cheering, laughing, urging her to go ahead, but her gaze remained locked on Ethan's. Was he waiting for her to do it, to make this decision? In the split second that followed, Lily's world seemed to slow down. Her breath caught in her throat, and her body became still. Could she really go through with it? Would it change everything? Just as Lily was about to make the decision, Ethan stepped forward, his presence looming over the edge of the pool. His voice, low and steady, cut through the noise around her. "Are you really going to do this, Lily?" His words were like a question, a challenge, but also an invitation. She wasn't sure what he was asking, but she knew one thing. His gaze was unyielding, waiting for her to make her move. And now, standing at the edge, She had to decide. Would she take the plunge? The coolness of the water still clung to Lily's skin as she stepped out of the pool, her body shivering from both the cold and the lingering humiliation. She had done it. She had actually done it. The thrill from her reckless decision was quickly fading, replaced by a gnawing sense of vulnerability that made every nerve in her body feel raw. Her clothes clinging to her skin as she stood only made the moment worse. She felt exposed in a way she had never experienced before. Every inch of her body laid bare beneath the dim lights of the poolside, with eyes that seemed to follow her every move. The laughter from her friends and the guests had blended into an indistinct buzz, but the sensation of being watched was suffocating. It wasn't just the usual gaze of curiosity or amusement. It felt like something deeper, more intense. Lily quickly grabbed the towel she had left near the poolside, but her hands were shaking too badly to wrap it around herself. The world around her seemed to blur. The party sounds muffled until her eyes inevitably found him again, the man who had been watching her earlier. Ethan. He hadn't moved from his position near the far corner, where shadows pooled thick and heavy, but his eyes, they never left her. There was no expression on his face, nothing to indicate what he thought or felt about her audacious act. Just a steady, quiet gaze that made her heart beat faster, made her question everything she had just done. He was there, observing her, as if waiting for her to come to some kind of realization. Lily's feet felt heavy as she took a few unsteady steps toward the edge of the pool. Her gaze shifted away from his, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he could see through the layers she had so carefully wrapped around herself. There was a strange discomfort in the air now, a magnetic pull she couldn't ignore. Despite the knot of embarrassment in her stomach, part of her couldn't help but feel drawn to him, as if the pull was impossible to fight. The others were still cheering, lost in their own excitement, their voices a blur of noise that didn't quite reach Lily. She found herself alone at the pool's edge, feeling small and fragile as the chill of the evening crept in. She wrapped the towel tighter around herself, trying to force the trembling from her hands. Her heart was still racing, the adrenaline from the dare still lingering, but now it was replaced by an uncomfortable vulnerability. And there he was, Ethan still standing at the periphery of her world, like a figure carved from the shadows. His gaze never wavered, though his stillness made him seem even more distant, more elusive. What was he thinking? Did he find her as ridiculous as she felt? Or was there something else, something he wasn't letting on? Lily's chest tightened as she fought to swallow the unease creeping up her throat. The feeling of his eyes on her was unsettling, but there was an undeniable pull that kept her rooted to the spot. She felt a strange, inexplicable connection, something that stirred beneath her skin, something that made her want to cross the distance between them. But she couldn't. Her body ached with the need to escape this uncomfortable moment. She wanted to slip away into the shadows, to lose herself, in the crowd again where she could pretend this had never happened. But she knew she couldn't. Not with him standing there, watching her with that unreadable expression. Then, as though drawn by some silent force, Ethan finally moved. His footsteps were soft against the marble floor, but his presence was undeniable. He closed the distance between them, effortlessly, his movements as fluid as the stillness he had maintained moments ago. Lily's breath hitched in her throat as he stopped just a few feet away from her. His gaze, though distant, softened for the briefest of moments, as though he was taking in the sight of her. Still wet, still vulnerable, the towel clutched tightly around her. He didn't say anything at first, his eyes studying her with a focus that made her heart race. A soft smile curled at the corner of his lips, but it wasn't one of amusement. It was something more enigmatic. "You're quite bold," he said, his voice deep, low, and impossibly calm. It sent a strange shiver down Lily's spine. Bold. The word lingered in the air, making her cheeks burn with embarrassment all over. Again. but there was something in his tone, something in the way he said it, that made her pulse quicken despite the discomfort. He wasn't mocking her. He wasn't judging her either. "You watched," she muttered, her voice almost a whisper. As she struggled to meet his gaze, she could feel her own skin prickling, as though the weight of his attention was enough to expose every hidden part of her. "I wasn't the only one," he replied quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. "But I'm not sure they were watching. In the same way." Lily couldn't help the flutter of confusion that rose in her chest. What did he mean by that? What was it about the way he spoke, about the way he looked at her, that made everything feel different? Before she could think of a response, Ethan stepped closer, his presence enveloping her in a way that made her heart thud in her chest. His hand reached out, and Lily froze, unsure of what to expect. But instead of a touch, he offered her a towel, a thick plush one, much larger than the one she had. "Here," he said simply, his voice holding a note of quiet authority. "You'll need this." Lily hesitated, caught off guard by the gesture. She'd expected something else, perhaps a sarcastic comment or a dismissive glance, but instead, he stood there, offering her warmth in the most unexpected way. As she took the towel, her fingers brushing against his for the briefest of moments, she felt a jolt of electricity surge through her. The contact was so fleeting, so brief, but it left a lingering feeling in its wake, like a promise or a question she couldn't quite grasp. And then, as she wrapped the towel around her shoulders, he spoke again, his words low and cryptic. "You don't need to pretend with me." The words hung in the air, heavy with something she couldn't quite understand. They weren't a command. They weren't an accusation. But something in them made her feel both seen and invisible all at once. Before Lily could respond, Ethan turned away, disappearing into the shadows of the garden. The sudden shift left her standing there, the weight of his words heavy on her mind. What had he meant? And why did his words feel like an invitation to something far deeper than she was ready to confront? The days following the poolside dare felt like a blur, but in a strange way, everything had changed. Lily found herself thinking about Ethan more than she cared to admit, his cryptic words echoing in her mind every time she tried to focus on something else. "You don't need to pretend with me." Those words lingered, like an invitation or a challenge, though she wasn't sure which. It wasn't just his presence that unsettled her. It was the way he saw her. Not just the daring, impulsive side that had come out at the pool, but the quiet girl who worked the fields, who had never quite felt at home in a world like this. For the first time in her life, she felt like someone understood her, even when she didn't fully understand herself. As the days passed, their encounters became more frequent, each one filled with an unspoken tension that neither of them addressed. Ethan was elusive, a man of few words, but the moments they shared were always laden with something deeper, something raw, though always hidden beneath the surface. It was at a small gathering in one of the estate's many lavish gardens that the silence between them grew thick, almost unbearable. The air was warm, filled with the scent of roses and jasmine, the soft rustle of leaves as a breeze whispered through the trees. Guests milled about, laughing, drinking, and conversing. But Lily found herself drawn back to Ethan, who was standing off to the side as usual, away from the crowd. He wasn't the type to join in the superficial chatter, and she respected that. But there was something about the way he stood there, detached, that made her feel an ache of longing she couldn't explain. She walked toward him, unsure of why she felt compelled to approach. She had tried, over the past few days, to ignore the pull he had on her, to focus on the trivial conversations and the sparkle of her new glamorous world. But it was impossible to ignore him now. As she reached him, Ethan's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, neither of them spoke. There was an almost palpable tension in the air between them, like something unsaid, waiting to be acknowledged. Ethan's lips curled slightly into the same faint smile he always wore, but his eyes remained distant, calm, unreadable. "You look out of place," he said quietly, his voice low and steady, as always. Lily's heart skipped a beat at the words. He had a way of making her feel like he saw right through her, beyond the layers of confidence she tried to project. "I feel out of place," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I think I'm getting used to it." Ethan raised an eyebrow, his gaze thoughtful. "You're getting used to pretending, you mean?" His words hit her like a splash of cold water, and she recoiled inwardly. Was that how he saw her? Someone who was only pretending to belong? The sting of his honesty left her feeling exposed, and she quickly looked away, suddenly unsure of what to say next. "Not pretending," she murmured, her voice tight. "Just trying to fit in." A silence stretched between them, the sound of laughter from the partygoers now muted in the background. Lily could feel the weight of his gaze on her, could feel his eyes piercing through the thin veil of bravado she had been wearing all evening. She felt bare, unguarded, like she had just admitted something she wasn't ready to admit, not even to herself. "Is that what you really want?" Ethan asked, his voice softer now, though still carrying that same weight of unspoken understanding. "To fit in with them?" Lily's chest tightened as she considered his question. She had never truly thought about it that way. All her life she had been told to aspire to more money, more success, more connections. The world she had stepped into now promised all of that. But as she stood there, facing Ethan, she wondered if that was what she really wanted, or if she was just looking for something, someone, who could make her feel like she was enough. Just as she was. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice small, vulnerable. "I don't know if I'm enough for any of this." Ethan's expression softened, though only slightly. He stepped closer, just a few inches, but the shift was enough to make Lily's pulse quicken. His presence was calming, but it also had a way of unraveling her piece by piece until she felt exposed in ways she wasn't ready for. "You don't need to be more than you are," he said, his voice low and steady. "Not for them, and certainly not for me." His words should have been comforting, but they unsettled her more than anything else. What did he mean by that? Was he saying that he saw her for who she truly was? And if so, did that mean he wanted her? Or was this just another of his cryptic statements that left her more confused than when she started? But before she could voice any of these questions, Ethan took a step back, his face once again hidden in the shadows of the garden, leaving her standing in the soft light. His emotional walls were as thick as ever, and Lily couldn't shake the feeling that she was always one step behind, struggling to catch up with a man who would never let her in completely. The silence between them stretched on, heavier than before. The distance between them felt wider now, like the gap was something she could never cross, no matter how much she wanted to. She could feel the ache of his words still lingering in her chest, but she couldn't voice the questions that swirled in her mind. Would he ever let her see the part of him that he hid so carefully? As the moment stretched on, the world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them standing in the quiet garden, both caught in a web of unspoken emotions. Lily's heart was racing in her chest, the air between them charged with tension. And then, as if caught in some silent understanding, their eyes met again. The connection was electric, but it was also terrifying. Ethan's gaze held hers, steady and intense, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like the entire world had stopped. Time stood still between them, and Lily could feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on her. She wanted to ask him everything, about the walls he built around himself, about the emotions he kept hidden. But the words wouldn't come. They stood there, neither one of them speaking, their eyes locked in a silent battle of wills. The distance, between them had never felt greater, yet somehow it had also never felt smaller. The charged moment stretched on, and for a split second, it felt like Ethan might step forward, break through the walls between them. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, he turned away, retreating into the shadows once more, leaving Lily standing alone in the garden, her heart heavy with unspoken words and the weight of the connection that neither of them seemed ready to acknowledge. The dinner was small, intimate, just the two of them in a quiet corner of the estate's luxurious dining room. Soft candlelight flickered across the white tablecloth, casting long shadows on the walls, and the world outside seemed to disappear in the hush of the night. The other guests had long since scattered, leaving Lily and Ethan alone, the weight of the evening pressing on them like a slow, unrelenting tide. Lily picked at her food, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't quite put into words. She had spent the evening avoiding him, distracting herself with the laughter and conversations that seemed to float around her like an impenetrable fog. But now, sitting across from Ethan, there was nowhere to hide. The walls she had carefully built around herself were starting to crumble, and she felt exposed, more vulnerable than she ever had before. Ethan hadn't said much since they sat down. He was, as always, quiet, his eyes steady, his expression unreadable. But there was something in the air, something between them that felt different now. The tension, the pull that had always been there, was heavier tonight, suffocating in its intensity. Lily could feel it in every word he said, in every glance he gave her, and she couldn't ignore it anymore. "Ethan," she said quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the nerves that tangled in her stomach. "Why do you do this? Why do you keep holding back?" His eyes flickered to hers, but he didn't immediately answer. Instead, he pushed his plate away and leaned back in his chair, the weight of the moment heavy between them. He looked as though he was weighing something important. I don't know how else to be," he said finally, his voice low, almost reluctant. "I've always kept people at a distance. It's easier that way." Lily felt her chest tighten at his words. She had always known there was something about him, something he was hiding beneath that calm exterior. But hearing it out loud made it all the more real. He was afraid. Afraid to let people in. Afraid to trust. She knew that fear all too well. But there was something in her, something stubborn, that refused to let go. "Is that really it?" she asked, her voice softer now. "You push everyone away because it's easier?" She paused, feeling the weight of her own insecurities creeping in. "I know what it's like to hide, to keep everything locked away because it feels safer that way. But it's exhausting, isn't it? To always pretend like you don't need anyone, like you're fine on your own." Ethan's gaze softened for just a moment, the hardness of his walls flickering. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "I've seen what happens when you let someone in. People leave. They always leave." Lily's heart ached as she watched him, as she saw the vulnerability in his eyes that he rarely allowed anyone to see. He was broken, just like her. And yet, despite the distance between them, there was a part of her that wanted to reach out, to pull him closer, to show him that it didn't have to be that way. But her own fears, her own self-doubt, held her back. "I understand," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been running from that too, from the fear of being left behind, of not being enough. It's why I've spent so much of my life pretending to be someone I'm not, pretending that I don't need anyone." Ethan's eyes met hers again, and for the first time in days, she saw something shift in them. Something raw, something that spoke to her in a way words couldn't. He didn't speak at first, but his gaze held hers, steady, intense. It was as though he was searching for something in her eyes, something that he couldn't quite articulate. Lily swallowed, her throat tight as she tried to push down the surge of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. "I don't know what to do with this," she said softly, her voice quivering. "I don't know if I can let myself trust you. Trust anyone, really. But I don't want to be alone anymore. Not like this. Not with these walls I've built around myself." Ethan reached across the table, his hand hovering just above hers but not quite touching. "You don't have to be alone," he said, his voice gentle, but with a quiet intensity that made her heart skip. "But I can't promise you that I'll change overnight. I'm not like the others. I don't know how to be the person you need me to be." Lily's breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening with the weight of his words. She didn't know what to say. Her mind was spinning, a whirlwind of doubt and desire, hope and fear. She wanted to believe him, to believe that there was a chance for them, something real. But the walls inside her, the fear of being hurt, held her back. Before she could say anything else, Ethan's hand brushed against hers, the touch gentle but electric. He didn't pull away. Instead, he let his fingers linger just for a moment, as if waiting for her to make the next move. Lily's heart pounded in her chest, her body frozen with the uncertainty of the moment. She wanted to reach for him, to close the gap between them, but her fear of being vulnerable, of giving herself fully to him, held her in place. And then, without a word, Ethan stood up from the table, his movements slow and deliberate. He crossed the short distance between them, his presence overwhelming. He didn't speak, didn't ask for permission. Instead, he cupped her face gently with his hands, his eyes searching hers for something she couldn't quite understand. Lily's breath caught in her throat as he leaned down, his lips brushing against hers in the softest kiss she had ever known. It was hesitant, as though they were both testing the waters, unsure of what would happen next. But it was real. It was more than anything she had ever experienced. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The fears, the doubts, the walls they had built around themselves. The kiss deepened, and Lily's hands found their way to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath the fabric of his shirt. For a moment, everything felt right. She could feel herself letting go, allowing herself to feel something, anything, other than the weight of her own fears. But as the kiss broke, their faces remained close, their breath mingling in the charged air between them. The uncertainty was still there, lingering in the space between them, both of them unsure of what the future held. Ethan pulled away slightly, his forehead resting against hers, his breath shaky. "I don't know if I can give you everything you want," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "But I'm willing to try." Lily's heart raced, the truth of his words sinking in. She didn't know what came next, didn't know if they were ready to face what was between them. But in that moment, she realized that maybe they didn't need to know. Maybe all they needed was to take a chance. And as they stood there, caught between hope and fear, neither of them knew what the future would bring. But for the first time, they were willing to find out. The days that followed the kiss were a strange mixture of lightness and uncertainty. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lily found herself waking up each morning with a sense of anticipation, an excitement she hadn't known she'd been missing. There was a new rhythm to her life now, one that included Ethan in ways she hadn't imagined possible just days ago. They spent more time together, and it wasn't just the fleeting moments at parties or in passing. Ethan had invited her to spend time with him away from the crowds, away from the pretense. It was just the two of them, in quiet corners of the estate, walking the gardens, sharing meals that were less about the glamour and more about the conversations between them. At first, Ethan's guarded nature was still apparent. He was distant at times, retreating into his world of quiet contemplation when the walls of vulnerability felt too high to climb. But Lily could feel the shift. There were moments when he would share small details, things that spoke to the heart, of who he was, to the fears and struggles he had kept hidden from the world. He talked about his past, about the mistakes he had made, about the people he had loved and lost. These weren't grand confessions, but quiet revelations that spoke volumes. Lily, too, found herself opening up in ways she never had before. The quiet girl from the farm, the one who always kept her emotions tightly controlled, began to share her thoughts and dreams with him. There was something about Ethan, his steadiness, his unspoken understanding, that made it easier for her to let her guard down. She shared the moments of self-doubt that had plagued her for years, the fear that she was never enough, never capable of fitting in with people who lived in this world of wealth and privilege. She didn't have to pretend with him. For the first time, Lily felt seen, not as a product of her circumstances, not as a girl trying to fit into a world that wasn't hers, but as a person. And that recognition, that simple act of understanding, was everything. Yet, despite the progress they had made, the tensions that had once kept them apart were still there. They were not free from the weight of their differences, not yet. Ethan, though more open, still carried the baggage of his past, the walls of self-preservation he had built up over the years. Lily could sense it. Whenever he pulled away, whenever he went silent, she knew it wasn't just his personality. It was a habit formed by years of emotional distance, and Lily, despite her growing confidence, still struggled with the fear of rejection. What if he left? What if she wasn't enough to keep him from retreating into his fortress? There were nights when she would lie awake, the doubt creeping in, wondering if their connection could really survive the weight of their pasts. But the quiet moments they shared seemed to wash away those fears, if only temporarily. They were learning how to navigate each other's emotional landscapes, how to listen and understand, how to meet each other halfway. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was real. One evening, as the sun began to set, they found themselves walking along the edge of the estate's lake, the soft golden light casting a serene glow over the water. The world around them was calm, peaceful. Everything felt still, as if the chaos of the world had paused just for them. Lily smiled, her hand brushing against the flowers that grew along the path. "I never thought I'd find myself here," she said, her voice quiet but content. "Not just here, physically, but in this place, with you." Ethan glanced at her, his eyes softening at her words. "I never thought I'd be here either," he replied, his voice quieter than usual. "But I'm glad I am." The vulnerability in his words, the quiet sincerity behind them, made her heart flutter. For all his emotional distance, for all his guarded nature, Ethan had given her a piece of himself, and that was more than she had ever expected. They stopped near the edge of the lake, the cool breeze ruffling Lily's hair. Ethan turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. "You've made me realize something," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "What's that?" Lily asked, her heart skipping a beat as she looked at him. "That I don't have to carry all of this alone," he said, his voice barely audible over the gentle lapping of the water. "I've spent so much time trying to protect myself, trying to keep people out. But maybe it's time to let someone in." Lily's heart ached as she stepped closer to him, her breath caught in her throat. His admission, his willingness to be vulnerable, made her feel something deep, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't alone in her fears anymore. She wasn't alone in the struggle, and neither was he. "I don't know if I can promise you that I won't hurt you," Ethan continued, his voice filled with uncertainty, but there was a raw honesty in it that made Lily's chest tighten. "But I can promise that I'll try. Every day." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she held them back, not wanting to let the emotion consume her. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling slightly as she grasped it, holding on like she was afraid he might slip away. "I don't need promises," Lily said softly, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions inside her. I just need you to be real with me. To let me in, too." Ethan's grip on her hand tightened, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if the world had paused once again, leaving them in this space of quiet understanding, where words weren't necessary, where everything they needed was already there. And then, as if unable to stop himself, Ethan leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. His breath mingled with hers, the warmth of his presence grounding her. "We'll figure this out," he whispered, his words a promise, but also a question. Lily closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her. There was no certainty. There was no guarantee that things would be easy, that they would succeed in navigating the complexities of their relationship. But there was something in this moment, something real, something worth trying for. As they stood there, faces inches apart, the tension between them palpable, neither of them knew what the future would bring. There was still so much uncertainty, so much left unsaid, but for the first time, neither of them was afraid to find out. Their hearts were open, their fears acknowledged, and the future, though unknown, felt like something they might just be able to face together. But as Ethan leaned in, the question remained. Could they truly overcome the past and build something lasting? The morning sun peeked over the horizon, casting soft golden light across the estate. The world around them seemed to awaken slowly, like a canvas slowly being painted with the colors of a new day. Lily stood on the balcony, the crisp morning air brushing against her skin, a quiet smile on her lips as she watched the beauty of it all unfold before her. It had been a week since their late-night conversation by the lake, since they had both admitted their fears, their vulnerabilities, and their hopes. The days had been filled with moments of understanding, shared silences, and tender glances that spoke louder than words ever could. Slowly, like two people learning to dance to the same rhythm, they had begun to move together, no longer afraid of the uncertain steps ahead. Lily felt a lightness she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't that everything was perfect. Far from it. They both still carried scars, still had insecurities to navigate. But they had chosen to move forward, to face those flaws together, instead of letting them keep them apart. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to find Ethan walking toward her, his expression soft, but with the same quiet intensity that had always marked him. He stopped just a few feet away, looking at her like she was something precious, something worth fighting for. "I was thinking," he began, his voice calm but filled with that familiar warmth, "about what you said the other day, about how we don't need promises, just something real." He took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. "You're right. We don't need to be perfect. We just need to be real. And I want that. I want to be real with you." Lily's heart fluttered as she stepped toward him, her gaze soft but unwavering. "I've been afraid too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid of not being enough, of not fitting in with your world, of being hurt. But I think I've found something here with you. Something real. And I'm willing to try. I'm willing to risk it." Ethan smiled, that faint but genuine smile that always made her heart skip. He reached out, his hand gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. The contact was warm, comforting, and Lily couldn't help but lean into it, feeling the weight of her own fears melt away in the softness of his touch. Without a word, he stepped closer, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was tender but full of promise. It wasn't hurried or desperate. It was the kind of kiss that spoke of a shared understanding, of two people willing to give their hearts without hesitation, without fear. As they pulled away, their foreheads rested against each other, the world around them quiet and still. There were no grand declarations, no need for words to fill the silence. They both knew, in that moment, that this was the beginning of something real, something worth fighting for, despite the past, despite the fears that still lingered in the corners of their minds. "I'm not perfect," Ethan whispered, his voice a low murmur. "And I don't expect you to be." Lily smiled, her heart full of warmth. "We don't have to be. We just have to be us." And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. She wasn't afraid of the unknown. Together, they had built something real, something that went beyond the walls they had both put up. It wasn't going to be easy, and they knew there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time, they were ready to face them, not alone, but together. As they stood there, in the quiet of the morning light, Lily felt a deep sense of peace settle within her. No more pretending, no more fear. She had found someone who truly saw her, flaws and all. And in that moment, with Ethan by her side, she knew that together they could face anything. With one final, lingering kiss, they held each other close, the world around them fading away. The future was uncertain, but for the first time they were both willing to step into it together. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where they would no longer be held back by their pasts, but instead find strength in each other.